Welcome to the last session in our webinar on basic concepts in offering spiritual companionship to adult survivors of child sexual abuse. This 10th last session is about your role and how to best think about your role as you are either offering formal spiritual direction or are being a wonderful sibling or friend to a survivor of abuse, but also if you are a sister, a deacon, a minister, a priest who may be approached by a survivor of abuse or their family, how you just want to be prepared to play some role informally in their life. Let's go right into this and talk about the scope of what you would do is constant and to offer constancy. Why? Anybody harmed by abuse doesn't know constancy, and worse, will be uncomfortable with any sudden changes or any deviations from your constancy, looking as we do for signs that the care you offer is really about grooming. Offering clarity, another way I've talked about that is transparency, so that what you say is what you mean. What you say is what you do. That goes to the point of commitment. And then to be an affirming presence. Why? Because till we really get closer to God, and for some of us, we may be very much alienated from God when we first talk to you. It's to be in some sense a presence that would be God-like to us. Now, I am oddly qualified to offer you these insights because I'm just talking about it from the opposite side of the role. You would be helping me. I sound kind of calm now, but boy, I sure wasn't calm, and I sure was in a lot of pain when I first approached the people I have known who have helped me. I suffered clergy abuse between the ages of 7 and 19, and it took 30 or more years to really grapple with what happened to me. The website Teresa Green can pick up where this session leaves off, by the way, with lots of other resources. We will talk about this trajectory of hope, this arc of recovery, and essentially how a victim and a survivor and somebody who's thriving will interact with your role differently, but your role will remain the same. A victim, a person who's really close to all the feelings of being a child victim, and that may be somebody who's been doing just fine in life, but suddenly they no longer can keep that in a compartment, but it also can be somebody fresh out of being abused or somebody fresh out of a substance abuse program when they've been pretty worked over as it is, just emotionally. In all cases, are still going to look to you to be constant, are still going to need you to be very basic and very clear about abuse not being our fault, about us being loved by God. From a survivor's point of view, certainly the guardedness, the testiness, the sense of distrust may have been reduced substantially, even to the point where suddenly you're interacting with this person with ease. What's important to remember is, especially if you're offering support to somebody who's been abused by clergy, the past can creep up on us, and what can happen is we can seem very, very, very vulnerable at times. We can even seem suddenly defensive at times, and it's not personal. So you have to be ready to depersonalize with us if you're willing to play this role in our lives, even when for a long time it seems like you didn't have to be quite as careful as you used to be when we first approached you. And when we're thriving, certainly you can celebrate with us and support us, but also you, in a way, help carry a past for us. In that sense, you do carry the cross. We've had to carry the healing, we've had to carry the suffering, but you can carry the memory with us. And that's very important. Because when you emerge from being abused as a child, it's a memory only you and the abuser have. And maybe family members might have had some sense, so they have some memory. But to be able to share with somebody not necessarily the details of what happened, but rather the agony of surviving is very important. It's a way it really matters to be known. So in this dialogue, as you integrate faith with recovery, again, it's kind of obvious that your role is as the spiritual companion, ever reminding someone on a very difficult recovery that God is with them every step of the way. And through their healing, helping them find ways to reconcile to some degree with the past, with those who abandoned them, with those who currently struggle with some of the effects of the abuse, and with church in some cases. It's very important to bear in mind, however, that you can't make that pace happen, and you'll notice in all 10 sessions I haven't gotten into the matter of forgiveness, because that's something that happens on God's time and God working with this person. And just like with all the other issues in the process of healing from abuse, you will be the witness, you will be the companion, but God will be in the driver's seat. But what's important when you look at the role, relationally, speaking of the Trinity, your ability to be heart to heart with this person I've mentioned before helps God be with you. Sometimes you'll be praying for the both of you when the survivor's in dire straits. Other times you'll be heartening the survivor to be brave enough to pray. And sometimes together you'll pray. But this relationship between you and the survivor will always have God. And it's important the survivor comes to know that and what it means. Similarly, by calling the person to approach the recovery creatively, you're also helping the creature be close to the Creator. And by playing the role of spiritual guide, you're helping foster that source of creative energies. Similarly, by saying what you mean and meaning what you say, you're going to be using language in a radically different way from what a child of abuse knows. All we knew were lies. And the way you use language will be reflecting, very importantly, God and the Word. Now, your role, we've already talked about in terms of your role, technically, practically, is to listen. Your role is to accept that others may be guilty. In some cases, it may be the church, maybe an upstanding citizen that you may even know. It's not about defending that person or asking for details or getting the report right. You're there to accept that somebody failed this person as a child. And your role is not to minimize or to solve this or to make it all go away. It's to recognize this is a very difficult burden. And that healing will be a process. It will not be a quick fix. So that there can be strong feelings, and they'll be very strong, and they will feel overwhelming for a while as the process proceeds. Here are some other do's and don'ts, or another way to look at your role. You don't want to lecture. You do want to pastor. This applies, of course, to priests and deacons and sisters I'm talking to, but to other ministers, to anyone who's seeking to bring faith, particularly the Christian faith, into the recovery process of another. You don't want to solve. You do want to honor that this is a very serious problem, and this is a very talented person who has already survived before they walked in the door to talk to you. You don't want to overwhelm with all sorts of ideas and statements and even pep talks. What you do want to do is help people be simplified. You don't want to overwhelm by talking about all aspects of what this person's going through, but to simplify And one of the best ways to simplify is to bring the person back to God. You don't want to dominate. That one way you dominate is by talking or lecturing or by trying to energize the person who's depressed. That's a reaction to a mental illness as opposed to really acting like a coach or a pep talker. What you want to do is follow. Let this survivor have control over this dialogue. Let them lead you where they want to talk, how they want to talk, how much, how fast. And if they're sad or they're angry, just let them be sad and angry. And if they're going to walk out the door as angry and sad as they were when they walked in, that's the process underway. Don't expect people to be linear. When one is working with memories that are suffused with enormous emotion, eventually you can sort through the emotions so that you can actually articulate the storyline. But what's most important is just let people babble to the degree that they do, and don't try to piece together the puzzle with them or for them. Do be willing to repeat what you say. For example, let's say somebody comes up to you after Mass or after a service and says, I'd like to talk to you about this having happened. Don't hesitate to repeat 3 or 4 or 5 times. I'll be in my office at 3 o'clock tomorrow waiting for you. It's okay to repeat it. If you can get an email off of them and email the date to them, that's great. Because in the state of early recovery, when all the feelings and the fright and the sense of being overwhelmed flood back into the consciousness, it's very hard to keep track of simple things like appointments. So be a pal and repeat. Certainly you don't want to pity. And if you find yourself pitying, you want to go into your own spiritual life and wonder why you're moving into a mode of patronizing or condescending. Here's a person who is our equal in front of God. And here's a person who's gone through more than a lot of people have, and they're standing in front of you. That's a heroic thing. And many times they've done it without feeling close to God. God may well have been very, very close, but to do that without the connection with God, being conscious and close, makes it all the more amazing that they would be standing in front of you seeking spiritual guidance. And don't have a response like a PR solution. Just respond with truth. What I mean by that is, in my case, and in a lot of cases where institutions are involved, there's a response that's kind of PR-ish that says, well, certain percent of bad apples in every bushel, and and we're doing all the right things to fix this, and blah blah blah. The fact is, at some point that institution failed that person. At some point those parents failed that person. That's the truth. And it's better to really just say those kind of very simple things and leave all the discussions of the bigger issues aside. Because really it's about this person. It's not even in the end about the failures to them, but the pain in them as a result of the failures. Keep it simple. And I've mentioned before not to wing it. You really want to know your stuff before you step in front of somebody who's been this wounded and this betrayed. And I underscore this for people within the Catholic Church, given the sensitivities and the real efforts within the Church, certainly not completely uniform, but certainly impressive in the largest portion, to make amends. The last thing you want to do as a representative of the Church is say something or do something particularly unknowledgeable, especially when there are resources for it. And you don't want to be goal-oriented because you don't want to be linear. You can be God-oriented. That's all you got to be. God, if there are goals, God will give them. The goals for recovery are very different from goals for self-improvement kind of programs, and they shake out as you go through your own painful process. And the other thing is, You don't want to feed a person's shame by asking them things like, really? That sounds awful, and are you sure? And could it be that maybe you misunderstood, or didn't anybody help you? And if they didn't help you, then, did they disagree with you? And everybody's got a point of view, blah, blah, blah. Your main job is, in this setting with this survivor, is to mirror their beauty, is to let them see themselves in the way God sees them. Because I guarantee a survivor of abuse has been denied that. So just to recap, make it simple. Listen, accept, affirm, respect. Listen, accept, affirm, respect. And your role, be constant, be clear or transparent, be committed, and be ready to offer affirmation at every corner. You are going to be the antithesis of somebody who groomed us meticulously over a long time in some cases, and groomed our parents and other people around so that they doubted or even didn't notice, as hard as that may seem. You're going to be the antithesis of a person, an abuser, a world of abusers, maybe a series of abusers, who represented danger when they offered safety, who filled our lives with webs of lies that in fact left us isolated and extremely exposed to danger, left in their wake confusion because it was hard for us and frankly most people around us to know what was true and what was lie. You're going to be the antithesis of somebody who manipulated every circumstance, every word, every line, everything we said, every gesture we made for their own ends. And your role will be to let us be exactly as we are for God's ends in our life. That's antithetical. And last, you want to bear in mind that you will be the antithesis of somebody who dominated us physically, but also, and more lastingly, emotionally and psychically. And, in many cases, like in the Catholic Church, in my case, spiritually. So remember, there's a patchwork. You don't have to do it all by yourself, helping this person. Most importantly, we all know God is helping this person, and your role is to help this person closer to God. But there are other things that will be going on. I've mentioned a number of things on this list, but I would point out desensitization is there are little practices often therapists will have survivors go through where they kind of edge up and get closer and closer to the thing that freaks us out. And that's a process of desensitization. It works for some and not for others, but it can be really great. For example, maybe somebody standing in the foyer of a church, somebody sitting in the back pew of a church, maybe somebody getting a little closer up the aisle every day, and maybe you being part of that. And in terms of your role, remember, you're not a therapist, you are a spiritual guide, and bear in mind, it can be very tempting for survivors to ask more of their spiritual guide than you are prepared to give. And that's where you sometimes have to really kind of help the person get into therapy. You're not the parent, you really are a stepping stone in this person's growth, as you have been for many people that you encounter in your ministries. But sometimes you might get confused with the parent, and sometimes a survivor who's in a really raw, vulnerable state may experience a tiny mistake on your part with the big mistake of a parent. You're not the abuser. You are the person who offers a safe setting. We've gone over this now for many sessions, so you should have lots of ways to do that. But it doesn't mean that somebody in a very vulnerable state might not be very, very sensitive and even misinterpret what you do because they're fearful of you being the abuser. Especially oddly, the safer we feel with you, the more we may worry that we're being groomed in a way we can't tell. So just be constant, just be consistent, be open, be transparent, and let us slowly work it out. You're not really a catalyst for change. Pain is the catalyst for change, and that's pretty much the only one. But you are a witness to this change, and you are a witness that God will give us the grace to get through this. You're not the advice giver, but you are the person who can affirm us, who can help us find God through prayer, and can turn to God in prayer. It'll be very important, especially not having the experience of helping survivors or the training, that you don't try to give advice. Again, I've said this many different times, don't try to solve it, don't fix it, don't manage it. Turn all of it over to God's love, both in your heart and help this person. The closer you let them feel God's love, the more you're going to be helping them solve problems. And bear in mind, there's only one Savior, and you're not going to be it. And at different times, survivors will feel so grateful for the relief that different people in the patchwork offer, including you. That's one thing. But it's another thing to understand that this ultimately, this recovery, this healing we're seeking is only going to come about through our process, our work, but God's entry into that. And in response, these are the things you just can't go wrong if you repeat this all the time. I am so sorry that this happened to you. I am sorry that we failed you. It was not your fault. You are not what happened to you, and you are loved by God. As you help this person, do not doubt that you're having an effect going out to their original family, to their primary family, friends, parishes, even their home communities. Bear in mind, it only took one priest to harm all of these circles of people through this one victim in the past. You're bringing God to them a little closer, a little bit more, is going to have the same effect, only with the help of the Holy Spirit. So we know which trumps which. So you have just graduated from the Basic Concept series. We've just finished your best role. I invite you to take a look at the 35-minute overview that I have that follows these 10 sessions on YouTube. There's also a 90-minute workshop called Do's and Don'ts, really super practical, and you can use the start, stop, pause button. You don't have to watch it all at once. But these two also draw on my story, and these also draw on the workshops that I've offered. Last, as resources, I will point you to Restoring Sanctuary, the book, which is a chronicle of people who helped me and how they did, and Veronica's Veil, which I've co-authored with Father Fiorelli, an oblate of St. Francis de Sales, and this is about 400 pages of a workbook intended very much in the tradition of recovery self-help workbooks, only for people who are trying to integrate their Christian and Catholic faith into their recovery process, and or who are trying to help them do so. And on my website you'll find articles and all sorts of stuff and resources and pointers to other sources of information. Last, thanks so much. This is my email. It's the last time you'll see it, because this is the last screen of the whole series. Please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions, if you just want to talk about the program you're trying to set up. I also am able to do webinars online with people if you're long distance. So thanks a bunch. I really have enjoyed this. I hope that it helps many, many other survivors.